Hello, I'm Kenan Proffitt. Welcome to another Blender Branch tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be doing some fun visual effect sky replacement. We're going to be going over some basic masking, some luminance key masking, and of course, a whole lot of compositing to create this final image you see here. So it's going to be pretty fun, and let's jump right into it. So with the new scene open in Blender, I'm going to go ahead and clear my scene and clear the rotation of my camera by pressing Alt-R, Alt-G, and then G, Z, and 5 to move that camera about 5 Blender units up, staring directly at the center of the grid. Perfect. And now we're just gonna go up here to this top right corner, or top left corner, I'm sorry, and select Motion Tracking tab. And in here, we're going to open our footage. It's not the greatest footage at all by any means, just pretty basic. Gets the job done of showing how quickly and easily it is to replace a sky with any shot. If you wanted to say, have a person walk up a hill in a short film or something and overlook a city, that's what this is for. It's a lot of fun and really easy. First things first, I'm gonna go ahead and hit prefetch, and that caches in all these frames here. And you can also go ahead and hit set scene frames to lock in the timeline to be the same amount of our video. We don't need all that extra. I'm gonna go ahead and actually end it at about frame 245. And yeah, that's good. Okay, so we're going to use 2-point motion tracking in order for our background image to match the movement of our video. So really all that's needed are 2 tracks. So I've purposefully shot this, or my wife purposefully shot this for me because I'm the one in the video. And I purposely shot it with 2 visible sort of points here. I have a light here and a power line pole here. And I want to track those. So the way we do this is just hold down Control inside of motion tracking and left click. And that just throws in a track there. And if we just underneath track right here, hit track forward, you can see it tracked that whole thing perfectly. And I always watch this preview over here on the right hand side and scrub through my entire footage to make sure that it didn't get off of that light in any dramatic way. And it stayed pretty much locked to it. So that's great. So I'll go ahead and jump back to frame 1 and try to find a point on this telephone pole that I can track. So maybe right here where it sort of juts out into an L. Might scale down a touch. We'll see if we can track that. It might get off. Oh, stayed on. It's pretty impressive. And yeah, it stayed on that pretty well the entire time. So that's great. So that's all that's needed for our tracking purposes. So now all that's left is to select one of these tracks, and underneath solve, if we go to geometry, we want to link empty to track. And we'll do the same for this one, link empty to track. And you can see up here where we have our default scene, we have 2 empties linked to our camera as a constraint. And that's going to come in very handy for our background image. Before we get out of motion tracking, what I'm going to do, or the motion tracking tab, I'm going to change it from tracking to mask. And I'll just select new mask and name this ground. And we're just going to very quickly create a rough mask of this ground. And it's going to help later with our overall mask that we create for our video channel to be placed in front of our background image. I didn't explain that very well, but it'll make sense later. For now, what we need to do is just hold down Control and left click and just sort of click along the top of this horizon here. It doesn't have to be perfect because it's not a perfect mask by any means. You can make it perfect if you want to take the time for that. But that would defeat the purpose of me showing you what we're going to do later on. So there we go. We have a pretty quick and dirty mask. If we press A to select everything and then hold down Shift and right click that track, and now press Control P. So what we just did is parent our entire mask to that track. And that's going to be useful because now if we scrub through our footage, you can see our mask stays perfectly tracked to this little point right here. It gets above the horizon or the ground right here. So we don't want that, so I'll just go ahead and modify this a bit. Oop. Just by clicking and dragging these points with my left mouse. Now if we scrub through our footage, you don't want your mask to go up above that line in any way. I think that's pretty good. This might be a little too close for comfort. We can always adjust this later. Mostly the reason we're doing this is we don't want to have to worry about any of our ground disappearing when we essentially key out the sky. And that'll just help for later on. Okay, so now that we've done all that, I'll go ahead and jump back to frame 1. And we can go back to our default panel. And if I press 7 for top view and 5 for orthographic mode, I'm going to go ahead and press H to hide my camera. And what we need to do is, if you notice, here, I'm going to look through our camera by pressing 0, bring up that side panel, and I'm just going to check background image, select this drop down menu, add image, change the views to camera, and your footage that we have should be in that drop down menu right there. And now if you can see what we did, our empties are linked to where we did those 2 motion tracks. So what we want to do is place an image behind our little hill here. So first things first, we want to add a bone to stretch these 2 points together. So that might sound kind of strange, but it'll make sense. So I need my cursor to be at the center of this empty. So the way I do that is to press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then Shift A, add armature single bone. So now this bone starting point is at the dead center of that empty. If we just tab into edit mode and position the other end of this bone, I'll go Z wireframe and just put it at the dead center of that other empty. Right about there. Perfect. So now I'll press tab for object mode, and with this bone selected, hold down Shift and right click that empty and press Control P and set parent to object. So we're parenting the bone to the empty. And now with the bone selected, I'm going to change it from object mode to pose mode. Select this other empty, hold down Shift and select the bone. And now we're going to press Control Shift C. And then this menu comes up. This is a constraint menu. We're going to add constraint tracking stretch to. So now that tells this bone to stretch to this empty right here. So it's parented to this empty and it's going to stretch to that one. And you can see it does just that. If we look through our camera, that bone is now stretching. It's ever so slight, but it stretches in proportion to our footage. So that's useful for what comes next. So I'm going to press 7 for top view, and then I'll just tab out of pose mode, and deselect everything. And I'm going to press Shift A, add mesh, and images as planes. If you don't have that right there underneath your mesh, it's very easy. You just go to your user preferences, and underneath add-ons, type images. You should see this add-on, import images as planes. You'll want to make sure that's selected. So with that done, I'm going to press Shift A, mesh, import images as planes, and go to wherever you have your background image that you would like, whether it's mountains or a city. I'm going to use a city. I just got this image off of cgtextures.com. If you'd like to use that, I'll place the link in the description of this video. And just hit import. So this is a very useful add-on because it means we don't have to do any image texturing. We just can import that image as a plane. So I can go right down here to texture mode, and there we have our image on a plane. Extremely useful. So now what we have to do is just sort of line up this city in a way that it would make sense. So you can kind of use, you want to use frame 1 really as a guide. And we might have to rotate those buildings a touch just so they look like they're standing straight up and down in proportion to our ground. Probably scale it up a good bit, and yeah, somewhere around there. So now this is the fun part. With that image selected, if we hold down Shift and right click that bone and press Control P, we have our parenting menu come up and set parent to bone. So that was the reason why we had this bone stretched to this empty, because now this image is parented to the bone, and the bone is sort of working in direct proportion to the way our video was shot. So now if we drag through our footage, you can see that image moves wherever the bone moves, it stretches wherever the bone stretches, left, right, up, and down. And that's what really sells the fact that this is, you know, a real city behind and not what we actually shot. But we have a problem here. You can see this image dips way beneath our camera. So that's easy. You can just scale with just the image selected. You can scale, or you can just drag it up. And you'll want to make sure that it doesn't go over the top or the bottom. We can always adjust that later once we get into compositing, but I think I might just have to scale it up some more. Just a touch. Maybe move it down. This is the fun part. You just want to make sure that image fills your entire frame, basically, or any part of your frame that will have buildings in the background instead of sky or grass. I think you get the picture. Okay, so that's good. So now we jump back to frame 1, and what I'm going to do is go over to Materials panel, and with this image selected, I'm going to change it from diffuse to emission. So that has a nice emission material. And I'll go ahead and underneath the render settings, hit transparent just to make things a little bit faster. And I'll select render. So now we've rendered a very boring image of our city. And it doesn't look so great, but it will if we just go to compositing instead of default. Check use nodes, backdrop. And I'm going to spread these apart, give us some room. Press Shift A and add in a movie clip node. And underneath this, we should have our drop-down footage. If I press Control, Shift, and S, or I'm sorry, just Control, Shift, and click, then we have our viewer node. And as always, you want to add in a scale node. Change it from relative to render size. And this is where we get some fancy work going here. I'm going to change this bottom left corner to the timeline, so we can make some adjustments as needed. And let's see, yeah, first things first, we want to get rid of this here sky. So the way we do that, we're going to use a luminance key node. So Shift A, go to matte, and underneath keying, luminance key. Drop that in, and we want to invert the black and whites. So I'm going to press Shift A, add in an invert node, drop that in. And you want to make sure that the matte is plugged into the color of the invert instead of the image. And so there we go. Now we have a mask created, a black and white mask, pretty quickly created. But we want to modify it. So essentially what we have here, everything that's white, we're keeping. Everything that's black is going to be keyed out. So that's how we're going to get our city in the background. So we want to modify it to make what we want to keep as white as possible and what we don't want to keep as black as possible. So I'm going to press Shift A, add in a mix node, drop that in, change it to add, and now Shift A and add in a mask node. And in this drop down menu, we have our ground mask that we created earlier in motion tracking, and plug that into that mix node. So now this mask is being created to help out, like I said, create the parts we want white to be extra white. So that just enables us to not even have to worry about that ground. It's automatically masked out. Now we want to select clamp so that those are blended together. Um, and yeah, that'll make a bigger difference later on. So now the values right here with this luminance key, this is what we are going to play with to sort of clamp down on what's black and white. So if I change the high values to about 0.8, now everything in the sky is black, and the low values, this sort of clamps in on our white mask. Now the tricky part, you can see that created a pretty good mask pretty quickly and easily. The tricky part, however, is when I walk into the frame. So when you throw a person in there, that's when it gets pretty tricky. So yeah, you can see now we have clouds all over again. So we have to clamp down on these, turning down those high values. This is where the fun part comes in, where you just have to play around. It's not horrible if some of those clouds are left in. Kind of adds to a hazy, foggy effect. Okay, so that's a pretty good mask for now. We'll definitely play around with it more. But so how do we get color back into our scene? We have a nice black and white mask, but we need color. So the way you do that is to set the alpha and then add the color. So essentially what you want to be invisible and what you want to be color. So we can do that by pressing Shift A and set alpha node. So I'm just searching for that because I'm lazy. And I'm going to plug in what we've created into alpha. So this mask, we're saying everything, all these black values we want to be alpha. And we're going to take the image output of our movie clip after the scale node and plug it into the image of that set alpha node. So there we have our color filled in. And you can see the blue edges and the scraggly marks and everything doesn't look so great. And that's what we're going to spend the most time really modifying, most likely. And if you scrub through your footage, you can see the problems. Honestly, when we shot this footage, my face was pretty overexposed because it was late sunlight. You want to do this sort of effect on cloudy days, not on days when you have harsh sunlight like I had, because you're going to have problems like that where someone's face is overexposed and it starts to disappear. Now I just wanted to show you how to do this effect, so I'm not too worried about that for this purpose. But just for your sake, when you're out shooting your footage, you really want to use a cloudy day when it's overcast. It'll just help you a lot. Okay, so that's enough of that. We can start to see the effect we have going if we search for an alpha over node. So alpha over node, plug it in between our background render layer and take the set alpha output of that and plug it into the top of that alpha over node and select convert pre-multiply. I might have it backwards. Plug it into the bottom. And now take the output of that and plug it into the viewer, and there you have our city behind our person. But you can see our problem here. It rose above the ground, and that's no good. So I'm going to go to top view over here in our default. I'll go to orthographic mode as well. And I just want to scale this up. And I think the rotation we did was a little too much based off of that render. So I'm going to rotate it a little to the right and hit render. That's too much to the right. It's a little better, a little more rotation. Yeah, there we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, great. So now we have the city in the background, and you can make whatever adjustments you want. Maybe if there's a certain part of that image you would rather be in a certain area, just drag it around in your 3D viewport. It's all up to you how you want that looking. So now it's just a matter of tweaking our mask to blend these two images together. So I'm going to go back to, I'm in Compositing. I'm going to escape that render and just focus on this mask here. So we have our color in the background, so we can adjust this luminance key. And you can zoom your background image by pressing Alt V and zoom out by pressing V. Little tip there. So let's just see what happens if we increase these high values, we get more of our image coming back into the scene. And that's not all bad if you want some of those clouds in, because it sort of blends together anyway as background scene. I think I'll just clamp up this low value somewhere around here. And that's not terrible. I'm pretty happy with that. You can go ahead and, let's see, hopefully this node setup isn't confusing here. Spread that out just so you can see what's going on a little better. So you can go ahead and after this luminance key, press Shift A and add in a de-spill, or I'm sorry, a dilate erode node. So I'm just gonna drop that in after that luminance key. And what that does is sort of clamps down on that blue line and helps to erode it. So if we set the mode to feather, and if you've used any sort of keying software, you know how feathering works. You just increase that number and it sort of feathers those edges, blurs them essentially. Did a little too much in my hair, so I'm just going to tweak the feather maybe, and also this high value, turn it up ever so slightly. It's always the fun part of keying is when someone's face starts to disappear. It's all fun and games until someone's face starts to disappear. Alright, I'm recording this kind of late in the day, so I think I need another cup of coffee or something. Alright. So you get the idea of, you know, it's tweaking these numbers. And lesson learned, shoot on an overcast day when you're doing this kind of thing. It'll help you a lot. Maybe if I just take down that distance to 1. Yeah, that'll be good. All right. Now, another way to further help blend these two images together, what we can do is after our render layer, press Shift A and add in a mix node. Drop that in, and we're going to take the output of our image after the scale and drop it into that mix node. And take the factor way down. Not to 0, but a little bit above. And what that does is mixes our original footage with our background image. And yeah, it makes our background image hazier and not as prominent, but that's kind of a good thing, especially for this kind of shot. It's in the background, you know, some fog, some haziness, and it helps blend these together and sell it as if, you know, right there in the same scene. It also helps to get rid of any outlining and edge issues you might have with your footage. So there we go. And now another thing we're going to do is after our movie clip, do some color adjustments. And what I want to do, you can make whatever color adjustments you would like, but I'm going to go to color and hue saturation value, drop that in, and I'm going to actually desaturate my original video a bit. So I'm going to go a value of 0.75. So that's pretty desaturated. The reason being my background image, I chose an image that was pretty desaturated. So I'm trying to kind of match those. So that's good. And now what I'm going to do for my background image is the exact opposite. I'm going to drop in a hue saturation, but I'm going to turn up the saturation a bit to about 0.5. And that's trying to match the saturation levels of the background image and the foreground image. Now what we want to do is after everything, our entire node setup here, after our alpha over node, press Shift A, color, and add in a color balance node. And this will further help to mix these two images together. If I boost the whites a little bit to make it brighter and change the light values to kind of a warm orangey red color. And then we're going to change, this is just some really basic color balancing here. We're going to change our dark values to something slightly blue. And this is, you know, you probably recognize it from short films and sci-fi things. This is really common, especially for sci-fi type of shots, to have this sort of color grading. And that don't look quite right. Turn the lights down a bit. Might boost the mids. And I might go to my original video and take the saturation up to 0.8 and turn the value up. That was a bad idea. I'll leave the value normal. Okay, and you can see now our image is pretty well blended together. I might throw in a color balance node after our background image and try to sort of play with the colors to get it to match our foreground. Our foreground's looking a little bit warmer than the background. So I'm going to try to adjust that accordingly. Add some contrast by taking down the darks and boosting the lights. And now one final thing, I'm going to try to increase, yeah, we can increase that feather there to 2. That's good. Alrighty, and I think just for smiles, I'm going to move my background image. So I'm in my viewport over here on the right, bottom right side. Move that over just a touch. Hit render, see what that looks like. I want that tall building in there. Yeah, I like that. So I'll escape that render. And the final thing I want to do for mine is add a very simple vignette. So I'm going to press Shift A, go to Distort, Lens Distortion, press the distort value to 1, getting it look real fine. And a math node, wherever that is, I'm just going to search for it, change it from add to less than. And you want it to be less than 1, or take the lens distortion value, plug it into the bottom of that math node, and change the value of the top to 0. I always forget how to do that. I don't know why. And then we're going to add in a blur node. Oh. Hello. Blur node. Change it to fast Gaussian, and we'll go value of about 50 for each of these and a size of 3. I like my vignettes to be pretty soft. And now we just need a mix node. Where'd you go? And set that to multiply. And take the output of our color corrected image into the top of that multiply node. And there you go. We have a vignette that we can adjust the factor of. That helps with the overall subtle effect of zoning in on our man overlooking a city. So there you have it. All that's left then, if this were a video for you, if you're making a video out of this, is to take the output of your entire node setup, plug it into your composite node, and render your animation. And that's it. Pretty simple tutorial. Don't let the node setup scare you. It's all pretty easy. We just have our movie clip, and we have a luminance key mixed with a mask that we created in the motion tracking tab. And we have some fancy erode feathering going on here on top of our luminance key. And you want to make sure you invert your luminance key to make that nice black and white mask. And like I said, mix it with your other mask if you've created any other masks. And then you just have the output of our set alpha node plugged into an alpha over node on the bottom. And the top of that alpha over node has a nice background image of a city here. And I'm not sure what city that is. If you know, or if you live there, please let me know. Inform me in the comments. I'm sure someone will. I just found it on cgtextures.com. Thought it looked cool. All right. And that's it. Just some fancy color correction and you are done. So pretty cool result. I was pretty happy with it and a lot of fun. Sky replacement can be extremely useful for creating professional quality visual effects in your short film or your scene. So I hope it was a lot of fun and hope it was useful, and look forward to the next Blender Branch tutorial. Thank you for watching.